In this video, I'll be talking about the new patch on the official server. But not in the traditional way that I just read the patch notes for you. No, we will go a step further because we will also tell you how these changes will affect the current meta. And when I say we, I mean Nacht from the NA-based pro team 𝐷𝐿 and myself, of course. In a couple of days, we will also release a tier list for this patch, so subscribe to not miss that. And tell me, what do you think about this new format? And also what you think about the heroes changes and our takes how these changes will affect those heroes. First, we have our favorite granny, Valentina. Her ultimate cooldown is now depending on the enemy's ult cooldown, but also multiplying it by 1.2 times, 1.1 times or 1 time depending on her ult level. The cooldown can also not go below 10 seconds. So for example, Atlas ult has a cooldown of 55 seconds at level 1. And of course, you're going to take this. If you multiply 55 by 1.2, you get an ult cooldown of 66 seconds, which is horrendous. I believe this will make Valentina a lot more difficult to use in the early game, as she won't have her ult for the majority of the time. And since strong ults have a long AF cooldown, her build is going to be very CD based. I mean, even more than it already is. She still will be picked as counter pick when the enemies have good ults to steal and when you need a mage that bursts enemies in the late game, but she will definitely be removed from the ban section. Next is our robotic spearman, Alpha, who installed an update on his little friend Beta. Beta will now lock onto an enemy after hitting the enemy twice with your skills, and whenever Alpha attacks this target, Beta will follow up with a laser attack that deals true damage and also briefly slows the enemy. They also reduced the time it takes Beta to attack when Alpha uses his first skill, but nerfed his base damage by 100 points. They also lowered the strafe damage from his first and second skill, but changed the damage it deals to true damage. His ult also received some big changes. The speed of Alpha's leap is increased, but the leap itself deals no damage anymore, because they moved this damage to his landing damage. Beta's follow-up damage was lowered, but it also deals true damage now. Since his entire kit deals true damage now, and it's a lot easier hitting his ult, I think he could become a strong pick as a tanky jungler. He don't need many attack items anymore to deal damage thanks to his true damage, and to trigger his passive more often you could include an attack speed item like Corrosion Scythe. For the rest you can build defensive items as his biggest weakness is still not fixed, which is he is super weak against hard CC abilities and the incoming damage once he dived into the enemy's backline. That's why he is only a strong pick, but not OP. Next we have everybody's favorite punching bag, Uranus. Favorite because it's so easy to melt him down nowadays. So Moonton increased the base damage of his first skill to help him with that problem. Wait a second, that makes no sense. Since he is a XP laner, it is now easier for him to cut the lane, so he can rotate faster to support his allies in ganks. But this buff won't change his overall situation. Plus there are also other heroes like Esmeralda who do basically the same thing as he does, just better. Back to the sideline, mate.
I wish they liked me. Nobody likes me.
Next is everybody's favorite DDR dancer, Joy. The movement speed from her passive is nerfed from 100% down to 60%, which is huge because she will have problems chasing enemies or escaping a team fight. They also lowered the shield from her second skill on all levels except the last one, which will make her more squishy throughout the game and could force Joy users to build a hybrid build like before. On top of that, they also massively increased her ult cooldown in the early game, which takes a lot of her early game dominance away, since her scary burst damage comes from her ultimate. After this nerf, she has to be very careful when she's choosing to enter a team fight. She has only one chance to make a very good play during team fights before she does start to fall off, as the time to trigger her ult is way too long. Next we have the Spear Queen Sylvana, who had a nice holiday the last couple of months because no one wanted to use her. The Flicker ult combo that is possible now is something everybody always wanted, except her enemies maybe, and you pull your enemies towards the lens now instead of the center, which means you can't really sidestep it but have to run backwards to escape it, or just dash out of it. Is this enough to bring her out of her holiday phase? I don't think so. If the CC immunity Moonton tested on the advanced server would have made it into this patch, it will be another story. But for now, she can keep enjoying a holiday and dream about her love Granger. Next, we have the again forgotten hero, Camilla. They increased the slow effect from her ult from 30 to 50% and the immobilization duration from it by 0.4 seconds to 0.8 seconds. God damn it. Which is something very well needed, as she did get a huge nerf on her ultimate a few patches ago that killed her again. Pun intended. This makes it way easier for her to deal with walking heroes who rely on movement speed and makes her a good pick against them. They increased the cooldown of her ultimate, which means this adjustment won't bring her back into the meta anytime soon. In my opinion, she would be a good fit in the jungle again. Her clearing speed has never been bad, her movement speed has always been good, and Camilla as support with another set hero was always extremely deadly. I hope she can finally come back to the battlefield, so Sicilian isn't that lonely anymore. Now we shall talk about our Captain Bane.
Look what I got. I got a jar of dirt, I got a jar of dirt, and guess what's inside it?
Moonton wants that Bane becomes another bruiser hero, so a mix of offensive and defense. His enhanced basic attack will now deal damage based on the enemy's max HP. They gave the bounce damage from his first skill a bit of a buff as well, from 150% to 200%, but the projectile doesn't increase its damage after eliminating a target anymore. They also increased the cooldown by 2 seconds on all levels, but the cooldown reduction he gets for every 100 physical attack has now been buffed, from 5% to 8%. His second skill has also gotten an adjustment, as his base HP recovery is now fixed at 200 at all levels. But his percentage of lost HP recovered has changed from 6% to now 5 to 10% based on the level. But for that they lowered the scaling from his total magic power. In my eyes, Bane might actually be a fairly decent hero now, but not on the XP lane. I see him as a decent jungler. You can actually build a hybrid build on him now, meaning it can be a mix of damage and defense items that increases HP, as his healing is now more effective when you have a lot of HP. Oracle will likely be a prioritized item for him, as that will boost his healing even further. The biggest thing is the fact that his enhanced basic attack now deals 7.5% of the enemy's max HP, which by the way is damn near to Demon Hunter Sword's effect. You could also go full tank with him now, as the passive alone deals a decent amount of damage. I see him as a situational pick against other tank junglers, since he can melt them down pretty easily thanks to his passive. Next up we have Kimmy. Moonton apparently believes that Kimmy overperformed when she uses the right items, so they decided to dial it down by giving her first skill a damage nerf. From my experience, she isn't really picked often, as she gets countered fairly easily by lock-on CC skills or heroes that can dive and burst her down. Her damage has been fairly decent, even compared to Trinity Marksman, as she's able to melt down almost anyone including tanks, but her survivability was the main reason she wasn't picked as often, as she's squishy as hell. So I believe this wasn't really a change they needed to do, but it will also not ruin her. Get out of our land! As we should talk about the bravest warrior, Lapu Lapu. Lapu Lapu has received a huge nerf from his survivability with a second skill, tuning down his damage reduction per hit from his enhanced second skill from 50% to 10%. This sounds so little, but is actually one of the reasons why I make this deep analysis. This change is taking a lot of his sustain away, so I believe that this nerf does change Lapu Lapu's position in the meta. Right now he is a very dominant force, being able to dive onto 3v1s and still be able to sustain quite easily. Combining with the amount of damage he can deal, it made him a great pick if you wanted to pressure the enemies with your insane presence. But with this change he can get melted down a lot easier, unless you get a very good set for him. The 5% decrease will matter the most in the late game, where the big boy damage numbers are coming, as a 5% reduction can mean thousands of damage points less received in the whole game, which will let you lose many close call situations that you have won before. It will not take him out of the meta entirely, as his damage is still there, and his blood loss axe with his passive shield will still help him to sustain a lot of damage, but he will definitely not stand as tall as before. Now let's quickly go down the slide with our slimy slime longtime friend Glue. They have decided to nerf Glue's passive stacks because they believe that Glue was performing way too well in the front line. His damage reduction from marked enemies is now reduced from 8% to 6% per stack. The good news is Moonton actually nerfed an OP hero. The bad one is, it's not really going to affect him. This effect is not what makes him OP, and his laning will be still as strong as before, as he'll still have the same amount of damage with his annoying first skill. Whenever you poke the enemy with your first ability, his sustain will be still good enough as he's a tanky hero by nature. So I hope you keep enjoying your time on the ban list, my slimy friends.
Quiet. Quiet.
Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No! It's Thunder I mean the Thunder Chicken Kaja. The developers have noted that Kaja has been too much of a menace, so they decided to tune down his teamfight capabilities by nerfing his passive. They nerfed his damage reduction from 5% to 3%, but increased his max stacks from 4 to 8 and increased the duration of it from 4 to 5 seconds. This nerf doesn't change much beside the fact that his passive is still going to be annoying AF, cause it will still provide him with a massive 24% damage reduction. Once it's up, it's even deadlier as it can stay up for 5 seconds now. So although it's harder to get up to the high damage reduction numbers, I believe it's just a very tiny nerf and makes no real difference, because the duration of the damage reduction will now last even longer. Now it's time for Lancelot's sister Guinevere. Her buff is actually quite crazy. Her damage buff alone is getting a damage buff of 100 points on all levels, which is insane, though her magic power scaling is reduced to 100%. Her laning phase will be pretty deadly, especially adding onto the fact that her ult damage has been increased by 230 to 410 points as well. This does make her quite scary in the early game, and since her base damage got increased while they lowered her magic power scaling, it now really makes sense to build defensive items on her. A hybrid build with magic lifesteal will be the way to go, as she'll have enough damage to scare the enemy's backline, but also can survive now the incoming damage that always killed her before. We also all know how ridiculous her CC abilities can be, so Guinevere mains are absolutely loving their life right now. Unless they like the assassin Guinevere style like me. And for our next one, we have chonky swole man Gato Kaja. This buff is quite simple, as now his enhanced basic attack from his passive has a wider range and can chase opponents with a little dash. I don't think this really makes him significantly stronger, but I do believe it makes his passive more meaningful. Gato mates be like, it's something. We also have another short adjustment for our chonky swinging bonking boy Terizla. They have nerfed the slow effect from his first ability from 30% to 15%, but they increased the duration to 3.5 seconds. This won't change much about his gameplay, as a slow is a slow and it will be used in the same way, though cutting it by half will make you notice a difference. His ult now is also way easier to use near obstacles, which means you won't have your ult blocked by wards like before. I believe he will be at the same place as before, a decent pick, but not in the meta entirely. Now we have the hero that was made cause one was too OP, Thorvios. His ult having less force swing time is a good buff that he honestly needs, but remembering the fact he's still vulnerable to CC still makes me question this hero. From what I have seen, this doesn't help him to catch people all that well either, so he's still near the bottom of the list for the XP laners, and if they want Thorvios to be more usable, they might have to do a revamp on him. Next we have the dashing man on steroids, our lord. They decided to give him a nerf on his base damage, as his damage was crazy even when you built tank items for him. They also nerfed his regen on his second skill, as it was what made him crazy sustainable at any point of the game. Still, this nerf will not change much for him in my opinion, besides his laning phase. He will stay in the ban section as long as tank ℕ exists, since the 2% healing nerf won't change much, as Oracle can easily fix that. The damage nerf is quite decent on him, so the laning phase might be a bit harder for him, but as I said, this won't change the fact that he will still be on the ban section, as he's just too OP and need a much bigger nerf. Next we have our blind bird lady Farser. Her flying skill cooldown is now increased from 23 to 30 seconds, which is about the same time as most ultimates. This is actually quite a big nerf on her, as now she can't really use the bird that flexible anymore. She have to save it for the moment where she really needs it, so either for a really good rotation or to save her butt. She will still be decent, but it will have a slightly impact on her performance. Now we have Big Horseman Hyla. What Moonton wrote here made me actually laugh. While Hylos may have more legs than most heroes, he still lacks mobility. Yeah, like the ninja lady who's slow AF, right? Hylos got quite many adjustments. His HP was nerfed by 200 points from 2090, whatever, I'm not reading that. But his first ability has now gotten a nice buff. He now gains 50% movement speed on skill use, which will decay over 3 seconds. And during that time, his first basic attack is enhanced and stuns the first enemy he hits for 1 second and give them a small knockback. His skill 2 base damage was nerfed in the late game, but his ult now slows enemies on impact by 75% for 1 second and then continue to slow them by 25%. This is not a bad buff for him, and I believe it makes him a lot more useful. I still don't think he will be a great roamer, but you might see him quite often in the jungle now. As I said before, he is a quite scary jungler with insane clearing speed who can torment his enemies in the early to mid game. Horseman Happy. Cowman has also got a nice buff, at least for new users, as many Minnow mains are raging on Reddit. They should maybe visit the anger management course Minotaur went through. Firstly, his first skill has gotten a huge nerf. His cooldown increased by 4 seconds on all levels, the attack speed reduction on enemies is removed, and the duration of his enhanced basic attack and movement speed reduction has also been reduced by 1 second. His second skill cooldown was reduced by 2 seconds, but they removed the attack speed bonus effect from it. Sounds bad? Well, for all those nerfs, he got an insane buff on his ultimate. His rage has been completely removed, and he goes into rage form whenever he uses his ultimate. The CD of his ult was increased by 10 seconds, but this buff is still extremely huge, as now you can always use his ult without stacking up his rage meter like before. The enemies must always be on their toes when it comes to him. There is another problem for him though. Moonton removed the extra hybrid defense and physical attack he got at max rage level, and replaced it with hybrid defense reduction for enemies and gain for his allies, which means our big cow is way less tankier than he was before. So they made him easier to use for newbies and made it much more easier to use his ult whenever it's needed, but removed many of the assets that made Minotaur a good pick for players who knew how to use him. I don't see that this will let him become a meta pick. He is just easier to use and makes many Minotaur mains who mastered his rage meter sad. And lastly, for the hero section, we have the dead guy everybody hates going against, Faramis. Moonton noticed he's been a little too effective with his ult, like, thanks Captain Obvious, and Mage Faramis has been dealing way too much damage in teamfights. So they decided to halve his hybrid defense on all levels, and nerfed his old HP in the early game, and increased the cooldown of it on all levels to 80 seconds. This skill 1 nerf is incredibly huge, as he is now way squishier and easier to kill. And his old nerf is also pretty big. In the early game, Faramis will not be as powerful as he used to be, and in the late game he might not have his ult at the right time because of the long AF cooldown. Even though all these changes are huge, I still believe as long as his ult is working in the same way as before, he will remain pretty powerful. His ult is still so strong and important that these nerfs really won't take him out of the meta. Aside from the fact that he got a lot squishier, his impact in teamfights still stands and he will be still standing tall in the ban list. Now we also need to talk about the item changes, of course, as they obviously affect the meta as well. Cursed Helmet and Molten Essence was too powerful for tank junglers in the early game, so they reduced its damage against minions and creeps in the early game. So tanky junglers need longer to clear their jungle and can't rotate as fast anymore. This may not be the biggest change, but it will still affect the jungler's clearing speed by a large amount. Invading will be a lot harder, timings are gonna be off, and obviously getting to level 4 is going to be tougher as well. I don't think it's enough to stop the tank jungle meta, but it will affect their gameplay 100%ly and make them less dominant in the early game. We all know Golden Staff and Demon Hunter Sword go hand in hand with each other, and the nerfs of these two can definitely make a difference. Golden Staff's physical attack went down from 65 to 55, and Demon Hunter Sword percentage damage was lowered from 9 to 8%. This is just a little nerf though, as these items are mostly being used in the Trinity build, so a little damage reduction is not really going to be noticed by heroes who use it. The War X buff is also insignificant, as it got 5 extra points of physical attack. This will still not change the fact that this item is only useful for certain heroes. And lastly, we will talk about the gold changes for junglers and gold laners. Junglers will now get more gold from killing jungle creeps. Gold is one of the most important parts of the game, so adding any more will be an incredibly significant buff. I do believe this was the compensation for the fact that they nerfed Molten Essence and Cursed Helmet, but this also does aid every jungler. So junglers who need to scale will actually scale much quicker now. Gold laners will start to cry now though. Their siege minions have less gold on board, since they decreased the bonus from 53 to 45%. That's a whole 8% difference. This does mean scaling on the gold lane early game will be a lot harder, and not last hitting siege minions will be even more of a punish now. Strong early game marksmen will be stronger now because of it, as the late game marksmen now need longer to get their first core items to become useful. It's not ruining them of course, but a little difference in gold will be noticeable. Now many of you are probably wondering, where is Novaria? Well, here, because I made a whole guide for her. See over there!